I was 8 years old when my mother moved my younger brother and me into a rental house on the edge of Briar Glen, a quiet town tucked deep into northern Vermont. At the time, I thought it was the biggest house I had ever seen. That probably sounds ridiculous now because looking back, it was just a narrow 2-story colonial with faded green siding and a porch that sagged slightly in the middle. But after spending most of my childhood in cramped apartments, the place felt enormous. It had a real backyard with an old maple tree, a basement with stone walls, and enough rooms that my brother Owen and I didn't have to share anymore. Mom called it our fresh start. She had just finalized her divorce from my father and wanted somewhere peaceful, somewhere removed from the noise of the city and all the memories tied to it. At first, Briar Glen felt perfect. Kids played basketball in the street, neighbors waved from their porches. On summer evenings, you could hear crickets louder than traffic. It should have felt safe, but almost immediately, there was something wrong with that house. I didn't notice it during the day. Daylight made everything seem ordinary. It was only after sunset, when the windows turned black and the rooms filled with long shadows, that the unease began. The first thing I remember happened maybe 2 weeks after we moved in. I woke sometime in the middle of the night. My room was at the end of the upstairs hallway, directly across from the bathroom. I had glow-in-the-dark planets stuck to the ceiling, and they cast this faint green light that barely outlined the furniture. I was lying there half awake when I noticed my closet door was open. That stopped me because I always shut it before bed. I hated sleeping with it open. The darkness inside felt deeper somehow, heavier than the rest of the room. I stared at it for a while, expecting my eyes to adjust. And then I saw something move. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the dark, but slowly, unmistakably, a shape shifted inside the closet. It was tall, too tall to be hanging clothes. It leaned slightly forward, like it was trying to step out. I remember freezing so completely that even my breathing stopped. The thing didn't rush at me. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. I yanked the blanket over my head and stayed like that until morning. When sunlight finally crept through my curtains, I forced myself to look. The closet door was shut, completely shut. I told myself I had dreamed it. Kids imagine things, that's what adults always say. And for a while, I convinced myself they were right. Then Owen started talking about the man. He was only 5 back then, too young to invent something like this in detail. One morning at breakfast, completely out of nowhere, he looked at Mom and asked, "Why does the tall man stand outside my room every night?" I remember the spoon stopping halfway to her mouth. "What tall man?" she asked. "The one with no face." He said it so casually, like he was talking about the mailman. Mom forced a little laugh. "Bad dream, sweetheart." But Owen shook his head. "He doesn't come in, he just watches." I felt ice run through me. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, not even Owen. Mom brushed it off, but I noticed she kept glancing toward the hallway for the rest of breakfast. That night, she tucked Owen in herself. She checked under his bed, opened his closet, even joked about chasing away monsters. He laughed, but later, long after everyone was asleep, I woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, coming up the stairs. I assumed it was Mom getting water, but the footsteps didn't continue down the hall. They stopped right outside my room. Then came 3 soft knocks. Tap, tap, tap. I sat bolt upright. "Mom?" No answer. The doorknob slowly turned. Not all the way, just enough to rattle faintly. I stared at it, unable to move. After maybe 10 seconds, it stopped. Then the footsteps resumed, moving farther down the hallway toward Owen's room. I wanted to call out. I wanted to scream, but fear pinned me silent. The next morning, I asked Mom if she had checked on us during the night. She frowned. "No, why?" I lied and said I thought I'd heard her. She shrugged and blamed the old pipes. But that afternoon, I noticed something strange. The hallway runner rug had shifted, dragged slightly toward Owen's doorway, as if something heavy had been pulled across it. The incidents kept happening. Closet doors opening by themselves, whispers too faint to make out, cold drafts in rooms with closed windows. Then came the scratching. It started outside my bedroom wall, a slow, deliberate scrape, like nails dragged across wood. The first time I heard it, I nearly convinced myself it was tree branches until I looked outside. There weren't any trees close enough to touch the house. The sound moved, across the wall, toward my window, then stopped. The next morning, there were 4 long marks etched into the paint beneath the sill. Mom saw them and muttered something about squirrels, but even she didn't sound convinced. Things escalated after that. Owen stopped sleeping through the night. Almost every evening, he'd come into my room crying, asking if he could stay because the man was standing there again. I'd let him climb into bed beside me, even though I was terrified myself. One night, while he was half asleep, he whispered something that made my stomach drop. He says you can see him too. I looked down at him. What? Owen's eyes stayed closed. He told me not to tell Mom. I barely slept after that. The worst part was how normal everything seemed during the day. Mom packed lunches, we went to school, neighbors smiled and waved. It made the nights feel impossible, like we were trapped inside some private nightmare no one else could understand. Then winter came, and with it, the first time I actually saw him clearly. It was late December. A storm had knocked the power out just after midnight. The whole house was black except for the battery lantern Mom had left in the hallway. Its weak yellow glow barely reached my doorway. I woke because my room had suddenly gone freezing cold. Not chilly, freezing, the kind of cold that burns your skin. That's when I noticed my closet door was open, and standing in the hallway, half lit by the lantern, was a man. He was impossibly tall, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. His body looked wrong somehow, stretched too thin, his arms hanging far past where they should have. And his face, there was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth darkness where features should be. He stood perfectly still. Then, slowly, he tilted his head toward me and raised one long finger to where his lips should be, telling me to be quiet. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. The thing in the hallway stood frozen in the weak lantern light, one long finger pressed to its featureless face. Even now, 20 years later, I can still picture it with perfect clarity. Its skin wasn't really skin. It looked smooth and pale, almost waxy, stretched too tightly over a frame that seemed too thin to support its height. Its arms dangled unnaturally low, the fingertips nearly brushing its knees. And despite having no eyes, no visible features at all, I knew it was looking directly at me. I wanted to scream for my mother. I wanted to leap from the bed and run, but fear held me completely still. Then it turned. The movement was slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. It pivoted toward Owen's room at the far end of the hall and began walking. No footsteps, no sound. It simply glided across the floor. The lantern flickered as it passed, and then it disappeared into my brother's room. The second it was gone, my body unlocked. I shot out of bed and bolted into the hallway. The cold hit me instantly, sharp enough to sting my lungs. Owen's door was wide open. His room was dark except for moonlight spilling through the curtains. He was sitting upright in bed, crying. I rushed to him and grabbed his shoulders. What happened? He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. He touched my face. I felt my stomach drop. What? The tall man. I turned toward the room, half expecting to see it standing in the corner, but there was nothing there, just shadows. I dragged Owen out of bed and practically carried him to Mom's room. She woke instantly when I burst in. I was hysterical, trying to explain what I'd seen, what Owen had said. For the first time, she didn't brush it off. She looked genuinely afraid. She got up, checked every room in the house, every window and lock. Nothing was open, nothing was disturbed, but she let us sleep in her bed that night. The next morning, she called an electrician, convinced the power outage and stress had somehow caused us to imagine everything. He spent most of the afternoon checking the breaker box and wiring. Before he left, I overheard him talking quietly to Mom near the front door. "Ma'am, there's nothing wrong electrically, but have there been issues in the upstairs hall?" Mom asked what he meant. He hesitated. "There's a section of wiring in the wall near your son's room that looks like it's been ripped apart." "Ripped apart?" "Yes, Mom. Not chewed, not frayed. Torn." Mom didn't say anything. Neither did I. But I noticed the way her hands trembled after he left. Things changed after that. She stopped dismissing our stories. At night, she began leaving every light on upstairs. She started sleeping with her bedroom door open. And most unsettling of all, she asked our neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, if she knew anything about the house. Mrs. Holloway had lived across the street for decades. I remember standing at the kitchen doorway while the two of them talked over coffee. At first, she seemed reluctant. Then she sighed. "The family before you had a boy," she said, "about your older son's age." Mom glanced at me. "What happened?" "He disappeared." The room went silent. Mrs. Holloway stared into her coffee. It was winter, 19 years ago, during a storm. His mother said she tucked him into bed around 10. By morning, he was gone. No signs of forced entry? Mrs. Holloway shook her head. Nothing. Police searched for weeks, never found him. Mom asked if they'd moved afterward. Immediately. Then Mrs. Holloway said something that made my blood run cold. The mother kept insisting she'd seen a tall man standing in the upstairs hallway the night her son vanished. Mom didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night, she pushed my bed into Owen's room so we could sleep together. She sat between our beds until we fell asleep. For a little while, things were quiet. No scratching, no whispers, no footsteps. I started believing maybe knowing its history had somehow scared it away. Then came the final night. It was mid-January. A blizzard had rolled in hard enough to close schools and bury the street in snow. The three of us slept downstairs in the living room near the fireplace because the power kept flickering. I woke sometime after midnight. The fire had burned low. The room was dark except for glowing embers. And standing at the foot of the couch was the figure, closer than it had ever been. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side. This time, there was no finger raised for silence. It simply stared. Then it lifted one arm and pointed toward the staircase. Slowly, deliberately. I don't know why, but I stood up. Even now, I can't explain it. It felt less like a decision and more like obedience. I took one step toward the stairs, then another. Behind me, I heard Mom gasp. She woke up. She saw it too. I know she did because she screamed my name and lunged forward, grabbing my arm so hard it hurt. The moment she touched me, the figure jerked. Its head snapped toward her, and for the first time, its blank face changed. A mouth appeared, not gradually, just suddenly, a long black slit stretching impossibly wide across its face. It opened, and from it came a sound I still hear in nightmares. Not a scream, not a growl. It sounded like dozens of voices whispering at once. Mom dragged me backward. The figure lurched forward. Then the fireplace flared violently, sending a burst of sparks into the room. And it was gone. Just gone. The next morning, Mom packed everything we owned. By noon, we were at a motel 30 miles away. She broke the lease, forfeited the deposit, and never stepped foot in that house again. Years later, when I was in college, I finally asked my mom what she'd seen that night. She was quiet for a long time before answering. "I saw something trying to take you upstairs." That was all she said. A few years after that, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back to Briar Glen. The house was still there, empty, boarded up, the yard overgrown. A faded county notice was nailed to the front door declaring it condemned after structural collapse in the upstairs hallway. I stood across the street staring at it, and then I noticed something. One of the second-floor windows. The board covering it had shifted just enough to leave a narrow gap, and in that darkness behind the glass, I could have sworn I saw a tall silhouette standing perfectly still, watching. I got back in my car and left. I've never returned. Owen refuses to talk about any of it. Mom passed away 5 years ago without saying more. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake to the sound of 3 soft knocks at my bedroom door. Tap, tap, tap. And no matter how badly I want to look, I never do. Because deep down, I know exactly what's standing on the other side. I was 10 years old when my mother remarried and we moved into a house on the outskirts of Millstone Ridge, a quiet suburban town surrounded by long stretches of pine forest. The house was newer than anything I had ever lived in. Clean walls, polished floors, big windows that let in too much light during the day. My stepfather, Martin, called it a proper family home. My younger brother, Eli, and I just called it too big. At first, I liked it. I really did. My room had its own bathroom, a closet so deep I could step inside it, and a wide window that faced the backyard where the woods began. At night, the trees looked like a moving wall of black shapes, but I told myself it was just a normal house and a normal neighborhood. That feeling didn't last long. The first night I slept there, I woke up for no reason. The room was completely silent except for the faint hum of the heating system. I remember staring at my closet door because it was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it. I always closed it. Something about open closets bothered me, even when I was little. It felt like anything could be inside them without you knowing. I kept watching it, waiting for my eyes to adjust. That's when I noticed the movement. Not inside the closet at first, at the window. A faint tapping sound came from the glass, soft, careful, like someone touching it with their fingertips just to see if anyone was awake. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and told myself it was branches, even though there were no branches near my window. The tapping stopped, then started again, closer to the bottom corner of the glass. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see, and I saw it. A pale hand pressed against the outside of the window. Long fingers, too thin. The skin looked almost white, like it had been soaked in something that drained all color from it. I froze completely. The hand didn't move. It just stayed there, perfectly still, as if it was waiting for me to react. Then it slid downwards slowly, leaving no marks, and disappeared below the frame. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I told my mother. She laughed. Not a small laugh either, the kind adults use when they think a child is being dramatic. It was probably a tree branch, she said while pouring coffee. Martin agreed without even looking up from his phone. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A few days later, Eli started acting strange. He was only 6, so most of what he said came out in fragments. One afternoon, he refused to go into his room and kept pointing at the hallway. "The white lady was there again," he said. Mom finally looked up from folding laundry. "What white lady?" "The one who sits on my bed." I remember how casually he said it, like he was talking about a neighbor. Mom knelt down and smiled in that forced way adults do when they're trying not to panic. "There's no one in your room, sweetheart." But Eli shook his head. "She doesn't talk, she just looks." That night, I slept with my light on. Nothing happened for a while. Almost 2 weeks passed with no tapping, no shadows, no strange noises. I started to think maybe we were just adjusting to a new house. Then winter arrived, and with it, the silence broke again. It started with the closet. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something inside it, a soft rustling, like fabric dragging slowly across wood. I stared at the door, telling myself not to move. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it when the closet door moved. Not opening, not closing, just shifting slightly, like something had pressed against it from inside. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to run to my mother's room, but I didn't move. I don't know why. Fear does strange things to you when you're a kid. You just sit there and wait for it to be over. Eventually, it stopped. The next morning, the closet door was cracked open again. I shut it and didn't tell anyone. But Eli wasn't sleeping either. He started coming into my room almost every night, sometimes crying, sometimes just standing in the doorway silently until I noticed him. One night, I asked him what was wrong. He said, "She stands by the window and watches me sleep." I told him it was just a dream, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The worst night came during a storm. The wind outside was loud enough to shake the windows, and rain hit the glass in uneven bursts. I woke up because my room felt cold. Not normal cold, the kind that makes your skin sting. My closet door was open, again, but this time I didn't look at it because I already knew something was wrong somewhere else. At the foot of my bed, there was a shape. At first, I thought it was just the darkness playing tricks on me. Then it moved slightly, slowly rising. It was tall, too tall for the room. Its head nearly touched the ceiling, bending slightly forward as if it didn't fit properly inside the space. It wore a long white dress that didn't move with the wind or the storm outside. Its hair hung down in thin, damp strands over its face. And then I saw her face. Pale, empty, not like a mask, more like something unfinished, and her eyes were wrong, completely black, no reflection, no light, just holes where eyes should be. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream. She leaned forward slightly, and in a voice that sounded like something dry scraping against wood, she whispered my name. Then everything went black. The moment I ran out of that house, I didn't stop until I reached my car. The snow was coming down heavier now, clinging to my jacket and melting into cold patches on my neck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys into the ignition. Scott didn't follow me outside. That was the first thing that felt wrong in a way I can't really explain. If someone's confused, if they think you're overreacting, they usually follow you, call after you, try to make sense of it. But the house just stayed there behind me, dark and still, like it had swallowed him again. I drove down the mountain road slowly at first, then faster, until the rearview mirror was just a blur of trees and falling snow. I didn't know what I expected to feel. Relief, maybe? But what I actually felt was that weird, heavy silence in my chest that only gets worse when you know something doesn't add up and you're not going to get an answer for it. I didn't call Scott again that night. I told myself I'd wait until morning, when things felt more normal, when my brain wasn't still stuck in whatever that hallway was. But morning didn't make it better. I woke up after barely sleeping and checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, nothing from Scott. That wasn't unusual by itself, but something about it felt final, like the visit had ended in a way that wasn't mutual, like I had left a place that wasn't done with me yet. 2 days passed before I decided to try again. I texted him a simple message, asking if he was okay and if we could talk about what happened. It stayed on delivered, then undelivered, then nothing at all. His number still worked, but it was like I was sending messages into a space that didn't exist anymore. That's when I started telling myself the easiest explanation. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he was dealing with something personal. Maybe I scared him by overreacting in his own house. I tried to make it fit into something normal, something boring. But the problem was I kept remembering details that didn't fit any of that. The footsteps of scares when no one was supposed to be moving, the way he avoided looking at the hallway, the expression on his face when I asked him who was downstairs and he just shrugged like the question itself was dangerous. And then there was the room, the one at the end of the hallway. I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw standing in it, that shape by the window. Even now, I still can't decide if it was facing me or looking out. About a week later, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went back. I told myself it was just to clear my head, to prove to myself that nothing was there, that it was just an old house, bad lighting, and too many nights without proper sleep. The road up the mountain looked different in daylight, less threatening, almost ordinary, the kind of place you drive through without thinking twice. That somehow made it worse. When I reached the house, the driveway was empty. No car, no sign of movement. Just snow that had started to harden into thin ice over the gravel. I sat in my car for a while before getting out. I don't know what I expected. Maybe Scott would come out and laugh it off. Maybe everything would suddenly make sense. But the house just sat there like it always had. The front door wasn't locked. That was the first real shock. I remember standing there with my hand on the knob, waiting for some kind of hesitation to stop me, but nothing did. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Not freezing, just stale, like no one had moved through it in days. "Scott?" I called out. No answer. The living room looked exactly the same. Couch, table, nothing out of place. But there was dust on surfaces that hadn't been there before, like time had moved differently since I was last there. I walked slowly toward the hallway. The light at the end was still off. I didn't want to go further, but my feet kept moving anyway. Halfway down, I stopped. There was something on the wall. A faint mark, like something had brushed against it repeatedly. Not scratches this time, smudges, like hands. I swallowed and kept going. The guest room door at the end was open, the same room. I stood outside it for a long time before looking in. Empty. But not the same kind of empty as before. This felt cleared out, like it had been deliberately stripped of anything personal. Even the air felt different in there later in a way that made my skin crawl. Then I noticed something on the floor near the window. A small pile of objects. Old photographs, faded, curled at the edges. I crouched down and picked one up. It was the house. Same hallway, same couch. But in the photo, the hallway wasn't empty. There was a person standing at the end of it. Not clearly visible, just a dark shape. I flipped through the rest, more photos, different angles, same hallway, same presence. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A photo of Scott. But he wasn't alone. There was someone standing behind him, close enough that their face should have been visible, but it wasn't. Just shadow pressed too tightly around his shoulders. I backed out of the room immediately and nearly tripped over myself getting back to the hallway. That's when I heard it again. Footsteps, upstairs. Slow this time, not running like before, just pacing, deliberate. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the dark. "Scott?" I called again, but my voice didn't sound right anymore. The footsteps stopped. A long silence followed. Then something different. A creak from above, like someone sitting down on floorboards that weren't meant to hold weight for long. I don't know what made me do it, but I went up, step by step. Each one felt heavier than the last. At the top, the hallway stretched out in front of me, and at the far end, the guest room door was now closed. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to, because I could hear something inside. Breathing. Not loud, not fast, just steady. like it had been waiting for me to come back. I stepped away slowly, then turned and walked out of the house without running. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe part of me still wanted an answer. I got into my car and drove down the mountain without looking back again. I never heard from Scott after that. No messages, no calls, nothing. And I never went back. But sometimes late at night, I think about that hallway. I think about how it felt like something was watching me long before I ever realized it. And I wonder if Scott ever really invited me there after all.